What we do in the original echoes in the eternal sequels. Today we're discussing Gladiator II, a follow-up 24 years in the making. Ridley Scott is back in the director's chair, and to be honest, his track record is so up and down that we really had no idea what to expect. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Hail, Dundas.
This is a movie podcast, and we are doing Gladiator 2 today. We did Gladiator 1 last week, a little sort of two-parter. Normally we do full seasons of things, but this is a little quick one. But the new Gladiator movie came out, it made sense to revisit the first one and then jump into this. So David hadn't seen the original until we'd done it last week. And then we obviously both went in blind to this because it's a brand new movie. So we'll start spoiler-free, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get to the spoilers. And if you are enjoying the show on YouTube, do hit the like button. It helps us out a bunch. You also get bonus shows by supporting us over on Patreon, but I'll tell you more about those at the end of the episode.
Just to jump in with the spoiler stuff, don't go to IMDb, for God's sakes.
Yeah, the IMDb spoils things in multiple ways. If you just look at it. If you just look at certain things on IMDb, it'll just spoil. I don't even want to say what you're looking at, because even that would be a kind of a spoiler. So just avoid IMDb if you want to go in completely blind to Gladiator 2, or Gladiator as the opening title screen made it look like.
That pissed me off for no reason. They split the eyes, and I was like, oh, you're very clever, but that's stupid.
Yeah, we keep going. Why are movie marketing people so obsessed with the fan-stick approach to putting a number into a title?
I don't know, man. What number alien movie would Romulus have been? How could they have jammed that in there somehow?
Well, depending if you're counting the prequels, it's either 7 or 5.
You could turn the L in Alien into a 7. You can make that work.
Yeah, Roman numerals are probably easier though. You could do the V, you know.
Yeah, the Resident Evil method.
Yeah, yes. So anyway, Gladiator 2, expectations. I didn't know what to expect from this. Ridley Scott is all over the place with quality. Like, sometimes he hits out, he puts a movie out that convinces you he's still got it, he still knows what he's doing, something like The Martian, which admittedly is already 9 years old now, but still, relatively recent compared to a lot of other things that he's done. And
Gladiator.
Then, and then other things that he comes out with, it's like, oh no, has he lost his damn mind? Like that, Gods and Kings Exodus movie that he did. I've not seen that, but it got a lot of bad press at the time. So didn't know what to expect. Paul Mescal, I saw him in a really good drama earlier this year that he did a couple of years ago. So I'm like, oh, he's a good actor. That's not a bad actor to have in your movie.
Yeah, I looked up his filmography and he is fresh. He has not been in much at all.
Yeah, I think he started on like a British TV show a few years ago, and that kind of was his jumping off point to get into the industry. You got Denzel Washington joining the sequel. Obviously, he's dependable. No concerns about him. Pedro Pascal's in this. No concerns about him either. And Connie Nielsen's back as Lucille. So, you know, the cast isn't looking too shabby going into it, but it is a sequel, and we are living in the era of the nostalgia sequel. And believe it or not, everyone, it has been 24 years since Gladiator came out.
Yeah,
a fact that hits me deep in the chest when I think about it. I remember in 2010 thinking, "Oh wow, it's been 10 years since Gladiator," and now it's 2024.
God, I think the big thing for me is going to be seeing the 25th anniversary things. Once those all start hitting for the things that came out after 2000, that's what's really going to drive a stake through my heart.
I was just to give you a little jab of that early. The Matrix is 25 years old this year.
Oh god.
I know it hurts. Anyway, so yeah, didn't know what to expect, but like, sequels are kind of coming thick and fast these days, especially these sequels that are like years and years after the original. How much is it going to tie into the first one? Is it going to feel like a completely fresh thing? Is there going to be a lot of ties to it? I mean, we knew at least one actor was back, so at least there's going to be some continuity with it. But they could have just done something that was set 50 years, 100 years later, and it's like, oh, it's set in Rome and we're dealing with gladiators, but...
they literally could have just jumped ahead to like the fall of the Roman Empire completely.
Yeah, but they didn't. They did choose to tie it sort of relatively... In fact, interestingly, it's 16 years after the original, which was curious because I'm like, wait, why didn't you just make it 24, which is what it's actually been?
That really strikes me that this version of the script was in pre-production like 15 years after the original, and it's just been sitting around for that long.
I mean, Ridley Scott's been talking about making a Gladiator 2 for at least a decade, so to be honest, that's not a far-fetched reason why it's 16 years. It's just because that's what it was in the original draft, and they just never changed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. All right, well, yep. I won't say much about plot here because I feel like there is a lot of spoilers going on. Yeah. Just to say that, would you believe it? Someone else loses a wife and they're very upset about it, and they end up being a gladiator. That's
my God.
That's all I'm giving you. For now, anyway. Mm-hmm. So, David, what did you think of Gladiator II?
This movie was remarkably unremarkable. I don't know. I saw this yesterday. It's been literally 24 hours since I got into the theater and sat down. And I feel like half of this movie has already left my mind. Like, I don't know. It just didn't do anything out there. It didn't stand out for me in any way. And I think that there were some cool moments to it. I don't think that it was an entirely, misfire from beginning to end. But I do think that two things that were hitting me was that this movie does do a bunch of things that regard special effects, especially once we get like Coliseum scenes. And I felt like they were worse than the original Gladiator was. I felt like I was noticing them more. Maybe it's just because they leaned more heavily on it, but regardless, it was more of an upset there. And then, of course, there are so many things that are the nostalgia sequel hallmarks of the, oh, hey, here's Han Solo's dice. And we just do that like 15 times. And every single time, like, I was torn because during the movie, the things that they are referencing are things that would make sense to be held in reverence. They are things that make sense to have put up on this pedestal and say, yes, this is important in the narrative of the story. But at the same time, I know that's not why they're doing it. They're doing it because, hey, remember that was a movie, and that's something that we should pay attention to. So, I don't know, walking out of this, I didn't dislike it that much, but sitting with it over the course of the next 24 hours, I realized it just didn't make any sort of impact for me, and I don't feel like it justified existing this now almost 25 years later.
Can I shock you?
Oh, please. Please, I'd love to have this discussion. Yes.
Well, tough, because I'm not going to shock you. I feel pretty much the same. It's a mediocre movie. It has some nice action bits here or there. It's a retread of so many things from the original. And I was actually thinking early on, one or two things that they had brought up from the first movie felt quite natural. I'm like, you know what? These make sense that these would still be around or whatever. But then, and even if they technically all can be justified, there's a quota that once you start to go over a line, it doesn't matter how justified you can make any other reference you make, it starts to feel like too much. And what we do in life echoes in eternity. Remember that line?
Oh, if only they carved it into stone so it could never be forgotten.
Strength and honor.
Strength and honor.
And these are just lines. There's more than lines, but like those are the things that aren't really spoilery to just say, hey, these phrases come up again. Some of them multiple times, in fact. My favorite, of course, actually is there was a dream that was Rome. That is hammered into us like 50 times over the course of this movie.
I'm fine with you having a dream that was Rome or whatnot. Fine. I guess that's kind of also an issue, and I don't think this is spoilery to say that this movie relies on the supposition that the previous dream that was Rome just straight up didn't work. Like, the end of Gladiator 1 happened, and everyone's like, we're going to do it. We're going to make Rome better. And it just didn't work. It just failed entirely.
That's actually just a straight-up sequel problem that's always been a problem with sequels, is that to have a sequel, you have to create new conflict. And sometimes that often means saying that the ending to the last one, despite it being a happy, I mean, arguably the ending to Gladiator 1's not completely happy, but there's like a hopeful tone to it. There's like something's been accomplished, change has been effected. And then the start of this movie with some text just goes, yeah, not really. Let's get on with Gladiator 2.
Well, here's the thing. I actually did some research into the actual historical stuff that happened. And I kind of I would have been more interested in the in-between of showing how it failed. Because of course it failed. Like I said that last time, is that like it was definitely going to fail.
And enough time passes, there's going to be new bad emperors and whatnot. Like,
but like it was remarkably fast how it actually happened.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Because the opening text at the start, right? And I don't necessarily spoil it, just say what the text says. Is it says, it's been 16 years since Marcus Aurelius fell. That was the emperor who died early in the first movie, right?
The one who had the dream of Rome.
Yes. And his dream of Rome has been forgotten. And I went, wait, in 16 years? That's not that long.
So the actual history of what happened, it's actually incredible, is that Commodus fell, he got replaced with someone who was from the Senate, and he started pushing through the reforms. He started actually doing the stuff. He was then assassinated after 3 months because he tried reforming the army, and then it went right back to how it was.
That was
3
quick.
months.
Okay.
That's how long it took.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I didn't even realize it was even this loosely based on true events. You know?
Yeah,
like, I went in with this as a complete work of fiction. Nothing is remotely historical other than just the vague setting of Rome. Now, I never noticed it, but I did read a thing online that said that in one scene someone's got a newspaper, which is nonsense because the printing press hadn't been invented yet. But whatever.
It would have been inconvenient to carry around a tablet.
You have to go to the library. You're just like taking bricks home with your big tablets with etchings on them.
I'd like to buy today's newspaper. God, they fill it up with so many ads.
These advertisements are worth their weight in stone.
Yeah, pretty much.
Literally. It's not that great a movie. And the sad part is that as it was starting early on, I was like, okay, we're clearly setting up this relationship between the main character and this woman, and I cynically in my head went, gee, I hope nothing bad happens to her. And
they exchange wedding rings, they have a kiss, they have a tearful goodbye as they get ready for battle. Nothing's gonna happen to her.
I mean, at least there was a slight difference of she is also a warrior. That's at least a little interesting. But I do think it was a mistake to start off with the loss of the wife, like loved one kind of like archetype, because honestly, I think for the first half of the movie, I was kind of into it. I was into the direction that it felt like it was going in. I was into the drama it was setting up. It was giving me a different type of villain, a sympathetic villain. And I shouldn't even really say villain, but a sympathetic antagonist for the main characters, maybe a better way of putting it, right? And it was setting up something that was a little bit more tangled of a web as opposed to the simple story of the first one. The problem is that once you get about halfway through the movie, it kind of shifts gears into a new direction. And a lot of the developments from that point on start to feel very rushed and unearned. The main character, for example, like completely changes his attitude on everything he's been saying, seemingly in the blink of an eye. And there's one dramatic moment that's supposed to inspire it, but they don't emphasize his reaction to it enough to remotely feel like, oh, he's actually felt the significant impact of this and is going to change accordingly. And from that point on, as much as I was enjoying Denzel Washington like chew the scenery a little bit, because he's very charismatic. He's a charismatic man.
It feels like going back to his training day sort of character.
Yeah, but everything from that point on, while I don't necessarily hate on paper the concept of what they're doing, nothing was given the time to breathe. It felt almost like there was a missing act in the middle, which is impressive given it's 2.5 hours long.
Yeah.
Like it's a long movie, and yet it feels like it's rushing through the plot beats. It's not giving characters time to really breathe and really feel like they're motivated by something, to a point where it almost feels like, especially in the back half, it almost feels like a checklist of like, okay, we have to have this scene from Gladiator again, which is the scene where, whatever, he does this move, or the scene where someone says this, or this is the kind of escape scene from Gladiator, but our version of it for Gladiator 2. There's a lot of direct parallels of this is just that scene or that moment or that plot beat from Gladiator, but done in here. Then there's some new context here or there to make it feel a little bit different, but ultimately not enough to really make it feel like it's got something to say in a big swing. And I think genuinely it's a movie that after there's some interesting stuff in Act 1, it gets worse as it goes. And by the ending, I think the ending feels the most rushed to the whole thing. And I just kind of felt like, wait, that was it? And also, the very final moment, which I will not spoil, obviously, I'll just say, they kind of end it in like a weird, nostalgia reference and not like
Yeah.
anything that makes sense for the end of the movie.
It's yeah, it's too much to say without spoiling,
Yeah,
but it's such like a disappointing, like, oh, that's how we're ending things. All right. Yeah. It honestly, a lot of what you were saying there of the checklist of Gladiator kind of made this one feel like it knew going in that it was inferior to Gladiator, and it was just kind of like, hey, remember this, hey, remember this. It was just trying to play on the good
I mean, that's
portion of the original.
That's the problem with all these types of sequels, though, that are like this, is that they all feel instantly inferior because all they're here to do is this, to do the member berries. Remember this, remember that, remember this thing. Which is that over and over again.
I think you were saying before with the Act 1 stuff, it was setting it up in a similar yet slightly off-kilter direction as the first one. It was playing on some similar beats, but it was doing things just different enough. For instance, our main character has much more of a rage and a temper inside him than Maximus did in the previous one.
And he hates Rome, right? I think that's the interesting thing, is he hates Rome, and the character that he wants revenge on is a character that we actually have sympathy for, because we know like his side of things and where he's coming from, right? So that's different from the first one in and of itself. And then you've also got this meddling political side that Denzel Washington's kind of at play with, and some of that is also quite interesting. The problem is where it all just kind of falls apart about halfway through.
For me, the biggest problem was that at a certain point, all of the Gladiator stuff, all of the stuff of like, okay, what does this character, our main character Hanno, who hates Rome, he's going in, he wants revenge on this one guy, and then halfway through the story, we do this hard shift over to, okay, but now it's about like saving Rome in its entirety and like all this other, like any of the personal character beliefs that Hanno has do not matter anymore. It is all about this larger scale. How do we fix this? That involves like 16 different characters, all with their own political motivations, and only like 10 of which might have been mentioned.
And this is what I was saying earlier. There's like a missing act where it transitions for the main character. And I think at a certain point, he stops feeling like the main character. He just feels like one of an ensemble. Whereas the first Gladiator was always Maximus' story. He was always the central character in that. But at a certain point in this, it feels like it's jumping around so many characters that it's just not really his story. He's just a player in the story. And that also hurts it. So, yeah, there's just lots of problems. And actually, my biggest disappointment, I'm going to hit it. Where the is Hans Zimmer? Where is he? Because because the music in this is a damn shame. Like, I mean, it's not even that they've got a bad composer either. The composer, I think it's Henry something. He's done solid enough stuff, right? This score does bring back some themes from Gladiator, but everything else just sounds generic. But I think the biggest problem I have with it, though, is the fact that I don't even always like the choices of when they bring back themes from Gladiator. And the theme they bring back the most is kind of what was the villain's theme in Gladiator, but they use it for, like, not the villain. It's kind of weird. I felt really strange about it when it tried to like mix in new themes, get into some of the themes from the original film. It just felt like it clashed, and I just felt like, you know what, you should have just loaded up the soundtrack to the first one, and like you're copying some of the scenes pretty much. You could have just played that track again, and it would have worked the scene quite well, to be honest. Yeah.
I honestly, I wasn't giving the music much attention, but I think that's mainly because it wasn't standing out at all for me. It was just kind of, all right, well, that's the score we're going with, I guess.
Yeah, I just very disappointed, given like how good the score of the first one was, and I even said that it elevated the first movie quite a bit. I think the fact that this one doesn't even feel like as coherent as a score should, never mind elevate the material, is a disappointment, because it could have covered some cracks here. If the music was great and I was enjoying the experience from that point of view, I might have like been able to get into some of it even if it was having problems. But
yeah,
like that was like the safety net was like just not there either. So I'm just left flailing and be like, where's my movie?
No, I mean, for me, honestly, part of the biggest problem I was having was less on the audio, more on the visuals. Is that there was this very, I don't want to call it dirty, but there was this down-to-earth feeling that the first Gladiator had. Like, it felt very much in, like, you know, when they're going out in the pits or whatever, you feel how bloodied it is, how like lived in this whole area is. It feels very much down to earth. This one, maybe it's just because of my own personal stuff, but like I was kind of going into this with the same all modern movies are filmed on sets sort of stuff. And this just felt like
too clean.
Everything was just its own clean little part of the world, to the point where there's repeatedly there are jail cells or prison cells for the gladiators to be held in between matches. And they felt like pristine to me. They felt like, no, this should be the most filthy room that I have ever seen in my life. And it's like, it's got some graffiti on the wall, but besides that, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, it's just modern movie. Like, obviously there's a lot more CG being used here, because the first one did have CG in it, of course, because they had the Colosseum and all that. But here we're in 2024. You get a lot more sort of sweeping shots of the city and all that, because hey, this is just what we do in movies now. We can do this at the drop of a hat. So there's a lot more of that. So it feels a lot more like I would have minded if it just get into the absurdity a bit more, because like. I wouldn't really say anything else about it. I'll just say one of the games involves filling the Colosseum of water so they can have like a ship like fight.
Yes.
And I was like, this is ludicrous and I love it. I want the silly version of this movie where it's just more and more ridiculous things that they're doing in the Colosseum. I could have been on board for more of that.
I mean, here's the thing, that this is the sort of thing that I'm almost positive actually happened. Like I am completely believing the fact that they built this with this as the potential to happen. But it just, I don't know, with the CGI in this, like I said, there was something to how limited it was in the first one, and was specifically used for things like buildings and such like that it never stood out. It was always something that managed to blend into the background. This one, it is brought to the forefront and it is never not noticeable. It is always something that I'm like, that's not there.
Yeah, that's fair. Is there anything else I want to say before we get into? I mean, I guess we kind of mentioned the cast already. I don't have too much to say. We do have like sort of twin emperors. That's what we're sort of introduced to early on, and they've got a very I believe Ridley Scott was quoted as saying that his inspiration for these two emperors was Sex Pistols, and I don't know enough about the Sex Pistols to know if this is accurate. But they've got a very kind of like, they're very evil, right? And the same way that Commodus was evil, they're very evil, but they're a bit of a different flavor where they're a lot more just in your face. And while I don't think that they would enjoy everyone hating them, I don't think they're as forethinking as Commodus to predict that the crowd's going to turn on them. So they're just like, no, we're angry, do the thing we want because we don't like him. Like, that's kind of their attitude. They're like children. Yeah.
I mean, in the actual history of things, they were put into power by their father. Their father was a previous emperor, and then they were supposed to share power together. And it kind of just feels like the spoiled rich kid archetype, who's just like never told no, but also doesn't understand why they are so disliked. Like they look around, they're just like, but like everyone told me that I'm daddy's best boy. Like they don't understand why they actually have to do things properly.
Yeah, but that's pretty much the only other characters we hadn't mentioned that I kind of wanted to. I guess I'll mention that the announcer at the Colosseum is British like TV comedy actor Matt Lucas, who because I saw him, I'm like, was that Matt Lucas? That's a random weird person to be in this, but it is him. So,
also in an absolutely blink and you'll miss it appearance is Derek Jacobi, reprising his role as one of the senators from the last time.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah,
he's there. And he's like, oh, but what will we do? And then goodbye.
Yeah. So I honestly, I don't think it's like a terrible watch, but I think it is in many ways. But by the end, once all the parts are assembled and you've seen the whole thing, I do think there's potential and promise in parts of the movie that then get squandered. There's some nice action to watch, some fun violence, I guess. Yeah. But by the end, I think it is kind of in that thoroughly mediocre.
Yeah, I'd say I agree with that. It's definitely not a movie that I feel like misses the point entirely. I think that you go in, you just watch Gladiator 1, you go in, you watch this. It's a good follow-up, it's a fine follow-up, but it is absolutely just sequel for the sake of having a sequel, not because there was a story that they felt needed to be told.
Yeah, it doesn't miss the point, but it doesn't have a point to make either.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it is, it does have that like fan fiction-y kind of like, this is just all the things that might happen next kind of thing.
I mean, we'll get to more in spoilers, but there's kind of this weird thing going on with Maximus, like in the past 16 years between, where like simultaneously he's this hush hush, like we don't talk about him. We can't believe the dream of Rome is now spoken in whispers. But then simultaneously he's like the hero that everyone aspires to be at the same time. So I don't know. I feel like it's just trying to straddle this weird line with the previous movie of how much it actually wants to deal with it, but also it cannot separate itself in any means.
Yeah. All right, I think we have to just go to spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie and don't want it spoiled, this is your warning to jump off. So spoilers for the movie, as always. Actually, one thing I want to mention about the start, the opening titles. I've already joked about the eyes splitting into two eyes for the title. But they do have like a full opening title sequence, kind of old school style, and they have kind of like what's basically like clips of the first movie, but it's presented through like a filter where it's like as if it's been like old Roman paintings. And I was like, this is a fine idea, but I was sitting there going, you know what? I hate that we're in a world now where I'm sitting going, is this AI? It might be AI, and I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It has that kind of feel to it, where it could be. So
for me, I don't know if this was different because you might have different distributors over the seas, but it's in the same kind of style as the Scott Free logo, Ridley Scott's production company.
Yeah, so we have that logo here.
But like it played immediately beforehand. Like that is played in the exact same way of like the painterly style where it changes every frame and then it will right into this opening sequence. And I'm like, is this meant to be similar? Is there a reason you have these two right next to each other? I feel like it was just coincidence, but it also felt weird to have those two immediately juxtaposed next to each other.
Yeah, I think they were just going for something that feels like an old oil painting or something.
Right.
I think that's what they were doing. But it kind of recaps, and it was kind of fun having just watched Gladiator a couple of weeks ago for the review, being like, oh, I recognize every single moment they're showing here in these little snippets, even though they're kind of obscured by the style and they're not completely in your face.
Yeah, I will say it because it is just visuals of the most visually striking moments. It doesn't actually do anything to inform you of what happened in the first movie. It's a recap solely of like, this is a visual that people remember.
Yeah, it's just kind of a hype reel, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So here's the weird thing, right? So I'm not going to necessarily go in order. I want to talk about certain things.
Okay. I don't think I could tell you the order once we hit a certain point. It all just kind of blends in.
Which is why I'm not going to even try. But I want to talk about the main character. I want to talk about Hannah. Or Hona. Hano. Fuck, he's licious, all right? He's licious. That's not.
Oh my god!
Beat around the bush here.
What?
Right? And Joe is so funny, but I went into this movie assuming he was licious because I'm like, obviously the kid's going to be the grown-up main character in the second one. That's the obvious thing to do. But they introduce him as this Hano character, and he's in Africa. He's fighting against the Roman Empire. That's what the movie opens on. Is this big battle? We meet his wife, who of course doesn't make it very long, and it's like, okay, multiple things to say about him, but both as like what he turns out to be and just who the character is before we even get to that point. The character on his own, before we find out his heritage and who he is and all that.
Yeah.
I appreciate a few things about him that's different from Maximus, just for the sake of, hey, let's have a different character. Let's not just have Maximus the second. Let's do someone new, someone who feels different. And the simple idea that he's more defiant, when he's put in front of people, like the first time he even meets Denzel Washington, who buys him when he sees him fight against the baboons, I say it was.
Yes, there's multiple baboons, but he fights a hairless one, which is all the more intimidating.
Yes. So yeah, he fights a baboon who kills like his friend in that same scene, and Denzel says, "Oh, he's good, I'll buy him." And when Denzel comes to speak to him, he just refuses to speak back. Right? He's very defiant. He's good at fighting and whatnot, but he refuses to interact and do it for their amusement. And there's an interesting scene early on when they first get to Rome and they meet the two emperors, the twin emperors, and it's like a little private fight. It's like, hey, a little gathering with all the high and mighty around. The two emperors are here, and they want to have like a little one-on-one fight. So like this like senator guy who's got some gladiators, he brings one, and Denzel brings our main character, right?
Yes.
And the main character's like, hey, let's not fight for their amusement. But the other guy's just been like brainwashed into fighter mode, so he just starts fighting. So they have this fight, and it's an alright little fight. It feels kind of, because it's more grounded. They're just in a room. His sword gets knocked out of his hand. He hits him over the head with like a lamp, not a lampstand. It's just wrong, but you know what I mean. Like, there's like a
candlestick.
I don't even know if it's a cat. I want to say it's like a sculpture. He had like a, it was like a, it was thick.
I thought it was like a vase or something.
Yeah.
But,
regardless, he picks up something off a table and hits him in the head. And even when one of the emperors comes up after and says, "Oh, that was very good. Where are you from? Where do you hail from?" He just stares at him and he's like, "I'm not doing this. I'm not interacting with you." And that extends to the fact that he repeatedly says he wants Pedro Pascal to die, right? His character, because Pedro Pascal was leading the Roman army at the start of the movie, and he gives the order to kill the archers, one of whom is his wife, and so he holds him personally responsible for the death of his wife. That all makes sense. And I appreciate that is his goal, and as soon as he gets into the Colosseum, and he's in the first combat, or maybe it's the second combat, he gets the chance, because I think it's the boats, because it's the with the crossbow. But he just
like second or third. Yeah.
But he stares daggers up at him as soon as he sees him. When he gets his hand on a crossbow, he tries to take a shot. He tries to shoot him, and it's this whole thing. But of course, by the time we get to that point, we've seen Pedro Pascal go back to the emperors. And we find out that Pedro Pascal's basically their Maximus. He's like the good fighter, the good general who leads the armies, but he wants to go home to his wife. But they're forcing him to keep conquering new lands. Hey, you're going to India next month, pal. You're not staying here and hanging out with your wife. So it's like, okay, you're giving us a character who's actually maybe a decent person, who's sympathetic, but our main character wants to kill him. And I like that as a setup because it's very, very different from Gladiator, right? As much as it's still got the whole dead wife thing, this was a very different dynamic to play with. And that's before we even find out that his wife is Connie Nielsen, Lucilla from the first movie, which is its own little reveal. But that setup and the refusal to like play ball in the same way, because I never got the impression that Lucius here was ever going to be like, oh, I'm going to win the crowd and I'm going to like win my freedom.
Oh yeah, he could not care less.
Yeah. And I appreciated that he felt very differently about all this compared to how Maximus felt in the first movie. And I think that's one of the better strengths of the early sort of third or so of the film.
Yeah, because in the first movie, Maximus's entire thing is he wants to gain his own freedom. It's not really about revenge for him. He just wants to get out of there. And so being able to win the crowd is this idea of, okay, I'm going to be able to like not be murdered essentially before I have the chance to do this. This one, he is open and willing to be killed at any given point because he's got this vision thing that keeps coming back to him of his wife at the river Styx and him crossing over to the afterlife with her. He's open to being killed whenever, but he's really hoping he can get his revenge first.
Yes.
So for it to be focused on this revenge aspect, and then we get this, again, midway through the movie, it switches over, but for the beginning of it, it's all focused on this rage inside of him. And then from the audience perspective, obviously the irony that we find out Hanno respected Maximus. We find out that he does many similar things in the ring to emulate his fighting style.
Well, I've got thoughts, because I actually was groaning at that at first, because I was like, why are you doing all the exact same thing? You're doing the double sword decapitation thing, you're swinging the blades the same way. It actually makes sense when you find out who he is later, because he obviously watched him as a boy and idolized him, so it's an intentional thing. It makes sense. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
But no, then again, it's taking those things and just making them ever so slightly different to provide a different plot. I think that's also at the same time why I dislike the second half of the plot, because it plays it so similarly to the first one. It doesn't really invent anything new there. It's just doing the exact same sort of Rome is in danger, this guy's doing bad things, and then we have to.
Well, yeah, that part of it. There's a lot more going on for the reasons as to why Roman's in danger, but it's very messy, and that's why it's not particularly satisfying.
But like I got why Maximus made the change over in his drive and his goal and motives. He went. It's all just one flowing river here. For Hanno / Lucius, it is absolutely a hard left turn all of a sudden. It's absolutely this thing where it's like, I hate Rome, all the Romans must die, everyone sucks. Oh, wait a minute, Pedro Pascal is cool? Okay, never mind, Rome's cool, guys. Rome's cool.
Yeah, because for the first third of the movie, I thought, oh my god, it's going to build up to they're finally fighting, and the whole movie is going to be building up to a climax where he chooses to not take revenge because he finally learns, accepts, and understands who this guy was, and that he was only doing what he was supposed to for his own family, or whatever, right?
Also, like, protect his wife slash Hano's mother now. Lucius's mother.
Yes, which is a whole thing. So right, so there's that element to it, right? And then of course, one of the things when he's defiant with the emperors, right, in that private fight, he does eventually speak. Actually, he recites a poem, some Virgil. Yeah. Yep. And talks about, something. Anyway, actually,
gates of hell are always open. Wink, wink.
Yeah. See, before we go into that, actually, I want to mention something because you brought it up before. So when his wife dies and he gets knocked out for it, but he has this vision of waking up on the beach and his wife's gone onto the what was it, Karen, the
ferryman.
Yeah, the ferryman. The river Styx, all that. And he sees it at a distance. And I sort of rolled my eyes a little bit because I'm like, this is just the walking in the field to the family in the afterlife in the first one. This is just this version of that, right? However, it did occur to me at some point in this movie that it's setting him up to like getting his revenge and dying so he can go be with his wife. And I feel like to make it a more interesting ending, the ending really should be that he decides that he's going to live and not die, which is annoying to me for a couple of reasons, because they see it again halfway through the movie or so where he has this vision, he sees his wife, he's like, I'm getting closer, I'm coming, I'm already dead, I'm just need to finish my business up and then I'll be coming to join my wife in the afterlife. So I thought that a justified callback to the original, and I do mean this would be because it's not, because the wording's so simple that it doesn't feel forced to me if they did this.
Okay.
But I was expecting a good payoff to this, where we'd have the scene where he's walking up to the boat on the river Styx, his wife is there, and like he's about to get on, she looks at him and he says not yet, and I that's what I was picturing in my head. He's going to say not yet, just like in the first movie with the whole, I'll see them again sometime but not yet, right? That was like a recurring thing. It's like the one line they don't bring back in this movie, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Right? But I thought, that would actually be a nice payoff to like him choosing to live would be a more optimistic thing. He doesn't have to die for this. He can enact good things with his life. He can do good things with his life and whatever. Right. Instead, for some reason, he kneels down in the Colosseum at the end and says, "Guide me, Maximus." And then we just get a repeated shot of Maximus's hand in the field from the first movie, and it ends with that. And I'm like, why isn't this him just ending his like death vision thing? I don't understand.
It's again, by that point in the movie, screw the wife, screw his original motivation, screw everything about his history, wherever he came from. He is now all about, I'm daddy's special boy.
Do you know what? I am just glad, because I was very worried in that final scene when he kneels down and says, "Oh, guide me, Maximus," and his hand's going through the sand. I really thought he was going to find the little dolls of the
dolls.
Yeah, the mother and son. Remember,
I forgot about that.
At the end of the movie, what's his face? Judgment Hunzu buried them in the sand.
Yeah.
I was really worried that he was going to find those, because that was going to be the ultimate like, F you movie.
Well, I thought it was going to be even worse than that for a moment, because as he's kneeling down, as he's kneeling down in the Colosseum, they do that special effect thing with like the purple cloud swirling that was in the first one, and I was like, holy crap, are we going to get a Force Ghost Commodus?
Commodus?
Or Maximus.
Yeah, I was going to say, that'd be wild if Joaquin Phoenix showed up and was like, kill them all, Lucius, kill them all.
It's the Hayden Christensen version. It's after he redeemed himself in death. It's all good.
There's no redeeming that prick. Anyway, so to go back to the other big thing about this character, which we've mentioned, but we have to talk about it properly, is that when he's fighting in the games, right, when he starts kneeling down and like picking up the dart, and he does a lot of the moves that Maximus did, it cuts over to Lucilia, and she's sort of looking like, oh, I recognize something in this man. This is just like Maximus, or at least that's what I was thinking at the time. All right.
Yeah.
And then the Emperor starts saying, oh, he said that poem when we met him the other day, the poetry guy. What was it? And they start reciting they say what they can remember of the poem, and they can't remember how the first line ended, and she jumps in and finishes it, and she has this look of like, oh no, on her face. And then it turns out that this poem is something that's in one of the chambers in their palace. And this is where they do the full reveal, the flashback revealing that this is in fact Lucius from the first movie. And I get so, like, I don't necessarily mind that he's Lucius, because I do think it makes some sense to have, because I was thinking before this, like, where the hell's their son then? Like, if this is not him. So that makes sense. But the problem is, though, why in the everlasting, why did they shoot a new flashback right after the events of Gladiator with a different kid actor? It's so distracting. Like, you could have just said this happened. You didn't have to show it. And you've got Connie Nielsen with CG to de-age her a bit, and you've got some different kid. And I'm like, that's not him. You even showed him in the opening titles. I saw him like an hour ago. It's not him.
I don't mind so much that they showed it. Like, fine, if you don't trust the audience to just take your word for it of saying, like, oh, I sent you away because people were going to kill you. Fine, whatever. Go ahead and show the moment, show how emotional it was for her. But, like, I just have a problem with the whole, like, later half concept of it, of, like, you have to be sent away because people are going to try to kill you. And then we also get another flashback, I think even before that, showing Roman guards that are looking for him. They realize that he's out in the outskirts of Rome somewhere, so that he's to be sent even further away, and that's how he ends up in Africa. But the whole thing is that Connie Nielsen says, hey, I'm going to come get you. Once things are calmed down, once we stop, having people who are going to try to claim the throne, I'm going to come get you. And she just never did. And that's the whole reason why he ends up hating Rome. And that's the part that I don't quite like.
Well, see, I don't mind that part. Like, assuming they did something with it, if this all came down to he resents his mother for abandoning him, that's how he sees it, and that's why he has this bitter pill, not just to Rome, but to her as well, and that kind of fuels a lot of his anger. Like, I could have been on board with that. Yeah. I think my two problems is, one, you don't need to actually show this scene visibly. You can just say it happened, so you're just being distracting with having a different kid playing the role. And two, I just, like, literally the second after the camera cut on Gladiator 1, she turned and said, you have to run because they're going to try and kill you. Like, that's totally just, like, no, that was like a kind of happy ending, and you're almost ruining it by saying immediately there was danger. Immediately he had to run for his life.
That's the part that, okay, now maybe you can correct me on this, just because I want to be clear if I'm misremembering. It was never explicitly said.
No, because I'm getting to this. I'm going to talk about this because I know what you're going to say.
Yeah.
I know what you're going to say, right? So, before we get to that, though, I will say, also, the other problem with this scene of showing all this happen immediately as soon as she has this realization is that it kind of takes away some of the potential doubt. Because when she goes to Lucius and says, hey, where did you come from? Are you my son? Or whatever she said. I can't remember the way she phrases it. Right?
She goes in there like already convinced, and she's just hoping that he's going to be open about it. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a random ass slave from Africa. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's what I'm talking about, though. Why not play this up where he denies, because he just straight up denies it and says, I'm not who you think I am. And maybe you could leave that be open and say, does he just mean that he's not that person anymore and he's new and that she'll never, regardless of who he physically is and who he was when he was a kid, or is it literally he's just not him? And I'm not saying you have to leave it a mystery till the end of the movie. Like, you could kind of have him taking up everything at the end as kind of like an acceptance of, oh no, I am this person, blah blah blah. But because they've already shown the flashback, there is like no tension for the audience in this scene. There's no mystique. There's no, is it him? Is it not? It's definitely him. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts.
Not even that. Even in just that conversation where he's saying, like, I don't know who you think I am. I'm whatever. Like, as soon as she doubles down and says, like, I know exactly who you are. You are definitely my son. Instead of him playing it as, like, you're incorrect. I have no idea what you're talking about. He instead says, like, well, if I were your son, I think I'd tell you to piss off because you abandoned me. I mean, him. Like, all right, kid.
Yeah,
sure.
That's a problem. So, before this scene, there's a scene where Denzel Washington's trying to like figure out stuff, right? And he's talking to one of the senators or whoever it is who's drunk, and he's like, hey, whatever happened to Lucila's son there? What happened with him? And this guy just sort of drunkenly talks about a bunch of things. About what age would he be now? Oh, I was 16 years ago. He was about 12, so that would make him. And they sort of leave it there like, oh, that sounds a bit, Paul Mescal's age. But then he's like, what about the father? He's like, oh, there was stories. You see, there was all sorts of stories. But here, the winning theory is that the boy's father was Commodus. And I went, wait, we're going with the incest child. We're going to confirm that,
right?
And then. It's almost like that's just like a red herring, so you feel relief in the scene that we've just been talking about, where she comes to him and he refuses to admit who he is. He does not say it. But as she's leaving, she says, if you don't accept my love, then accept that you have your father's strength. His name was Maximus, and she walks out.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, we're just saying that now? Because that's not something that's said in the first movie. Like, don't get me wrong, you could, I think it was open to interpretation in the first movie that he could be Maximus's son.
I think they said something about oh yeah, you and I had a fling or something like that, 9 years ago or 10 years ago or something like that. And if you line it all up, it's pretty close to what the kid's age is at that point. It could make sense.
Yeah. Although, if I remember correctly, Maximus says, oh, I've got a boy almost that age, which... Either he met his wife right after he stopped that fling, or Maximus is a little less likable in hindsight.
It's just corrupting the first movie to make your plot work. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is you have to make some things worse from the first movie just to have this plot exist, and that's kind of one of the victims of it. So
I'm gonna jump just slightly ahead here to the thing that just pissed me off the most with this whole Maximus stuff. They specifically say that all of the super duper cool gladiators get tombs and they're buried underneath the Colosseum or whatever.
Yes.
And Maximus has his, because of course he was the super duper coolest one, but they give him his armor and his sword is still there. And you see Lucius goes down and he looks at it and it's all they got the what we do in life echoes in eternity line carved in stone above.
Little flashback to when he was showing him this is this horse and this is this horse.
That's the part that pissed me off the most, because he's looking at this armor and he's looking at it with this reverence, oh my god, I remember when he showed me that armor. And then they show the most banal clip from the first movie where it didn't matter at all. It was just there to fill the time until we got the reveal that Lucius was the Queen's son. That was the entire point of that scene. It's once again the keys in the cockpit, or the dice in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. It doesn't matter, but they're playing it up as ooh, look at this. We're showing the one time we talked about the armor to justify why it's so reverent that it be here now.
I'm pretty sure this is still before he's finally just started admitting that he's Maximus' son, that he's Lucilia's son. So this is just sort of saying, hey, it's definitely him, audience.
Yeah.
But, let's not play, fast and loose with it. That's the thing. So even with this though, I still didn't hate the scene where she talked to him. One, because him refusing to accept it could at least be a cool character thing if he hates her, and part of this movie's him getting over that anger, him having to forgive something to move forward. I could see some benefit to that. And also the fact that he says to her in that scene, hey, that general guy, I want his head. I'm going to kill him. He ordered men to kill my wife. And I thought, oh, there's a lot of good potential drama of trying to unpack that, and maybe her talking to Pascal.
It's even doubling down on how much he hates his mother at this point, not only for abandoning him, but for her new lover, who he saw her with, is the person who killed his wife. So yeah, double down on the hatred there. But
then you've also got this idea that she's going to ask Pedro Pascal to be like, hey, I need you to break him out. I'm not having my son be killed in Gladiator games. So,
and that's also simultaneous where Pedro Pascal's like, hey, look, I got an army that's going to show up right at the end of the games. Can we just hold off until then? Is there any way we can make that work?
Yeah. So while we've critiqued some things here at this point, because there is some messiness, and I don't love everything about how they reveal this, even though I do think it makes sense that this is who it is that I think the movie is still working well enough and is fairly solid up until Pedro Pascal dies. It's after that scene where it all comes falling apart. One, because that happens much earlier than I was anticipating, because Denzel Washington and we'll talk about his subplot a bit later, but he's responsible for the Emperor's finding out that this attempted prison break and coup with the army is going to happen. So they're lying in wait, which is also something that happened in the first film when they were trying to break out Maximus. The army was lying in wait and captured him. And the Emperors want to kill him, and Denzel's the one that says, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! They'll hate you. The crowd already hates you. They're going to hate you for this. So no, have his death be public. Put him in the game. So it's like one-on-one fight. Have him face off against Lucius down there."
They basically say, "Hey, look, this guy, he's a hero of Rome. The whole reason we're having these games is to celebrate him being such a hero of Rome. So if you kill him, they're going to hate you. But instead, if you put it into the gods' hands and say, like, oh, the gods say whether or not he survives, well, that's not on you anymore."
Yeah, and there's even some interesting stuff that could have come out of this, because the fact that the people on the streets of Rome are rioting because of his death afterwards is quite interesting. But that is really where the movie starts to just tumble down into the oblivion, because everything just starts happening so quickly. Denzel Washington's plan just goes into motion like absurdly fast. Like all that goes on.
I don't want to jump into Denzel Washington if we're not ready, but I think that my major problem at this point in the movie is that they didn't do enough with Denzel before this point, and then they put him into turbo drive after this point.
Oh yeah, because
it felt like he was just thrust into the forelight of that.
He becomes the main villain of the movie. So you start the movie thinking it's Pedro Pascal, but you find out he's sympathetic, which was a good swerve because it's right early on. Yeah. It makes things all have a bit more depth. So that was really nice. And you're thinking, okay, so it's these two comically villainous emperors. Well, they're a bit cartoony. They make sense as bad guys. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, you probably have to slim it down to one for the fight at the end, but yeah, you could have just one of them be cartoonishly over-the-top evil.
Yeah, I don't even know if you'd have them in like a one-on-one fight necessarily. I would just change the ending at that point to play out differently. But but that's fine. But then obviously they do this thing where Denzel's scheming, he's plotting, he's making bets with a senator, but he keeps doubling the bets so that he eventually just like the senator owns him. He's like owes him his house, owes him everything, and also owes him his loyalty. And that's when he fesses up. Oh yeah, Lucilia and Pedro Pascal are going to overthrow the emperors. This is happening, and that's like why that all plays out. And Denzel Washington is very entertaining to watch in all of these scenes. Like none of this is a knock against him as a performer, because he's very entertaining. But then you get to like this part of the movie though, after Pedro Pascal's had his big glorious death, where the main character Lucius refuses to kill him and just gets down on his knees in front of him. And Pedro Pascal says, what does he say to him? So that'll be his mother.
He basically says like, look, hey, you kill me if you want. I get it. I have done bad things, but just know I love your mother, and I'm also a super huge fan of Maximus. And Lucius is like, me too. What are the odds?
I feel like, I mean, Pedro Pascal is old enough that he probably served under Maximus, like in some form or another.
I think they specifically said he served under the previous emperor, under Marcus Aurelius, and so therefore he respected Maximus as a general. He was in the army at that same time.
So, yeah, but this is when Denzel Washington, when the riots are happening outside, and the two emperors like, why don't they like us? Why are they upset? All of a sudden, like, one of them, right, is a bit more scared, and Joseph Quinn's one, Gaeta, he's the one who's like, oh, my brother's disease is spread from his loins to his brain. And I'm like, wait, does he have something? I feel like that's something that should have been brought up a bit earlier.
I don't think it was that important. I think it's just important to know at any point here that he's not mentally sound. And I got that vibe, what with the whole monkey thing earlier on. He doesn't seem okay.
Yes, with the giggling and the like the way he just kind of cackles and whatnot. So Denzel Washington basically just goes and manipulates the other one who's more paranoid that, oh, your brother's going to turn on you. He's playing you against you. You should kill him.
I love the line there is he's like, he's always trying to take stuff from me. Even when we were in the womb, he tried to cut my umbilical cord. And he's like, oh, you remember that, huh? Yeah, really? Okay, good talk, buddy. Go sit down.
Yeah, and even though he does try to kill his brother, Denzel Washington basically has to come up behind him and hold his hand to sort of thrust the blade in. So it couldn't be more puppeted. Like, he literally is moving his hand to stab his brother. And it's like, okay.
At first, I thought that was just a really heavy-handed metaphor of just like, see, he's the real one responsible behind it. But I was like, oh no, wait, that actually happened. Okay, never mind.
Oh, really? That did happen? Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
No, I'm not talking about reality. I'm saying like in the context of the movie, I
right.
thought like having him standing behind was just going to be the heavy-handed metaphor. But then he reached in and actually started stabbing, and I was like, oh, okay, so you're just going all the way with this one.
Yeah, and he's also plotting to kill the remaining brother as well. It's just a case of, the remaining brother will put him in a position of power, and the Senate will have to accept it. And then, in all the chaos, the brother's going to be dead, and now he'll be left as the new emperor.
Right. And then they get into his motivations, and this is where I started losing it, because it's like they throw this all in at the end. It barely feels like it's anything. It's fine for the context of the character, but from an audience viewpoint, it's nowhere near explored enough. And in just one conversation with Lucilla, he basically reveals, I was a slave myself, I was in the gladiatorial fights, I freed myself, and unlike all the other people who would like go out and seek peace and all that stuff that we saw before, I demand power of my own, and so I have manipulated myself to becoming second in command to the emperor, and once I kill him, I will take the place as next emperor.
Yeah, there's a line earlier on that kind of teases this, where he says that a slave's dream is not freedom, it's to have a slave of their own. I think that's what he said. Which, okay, that's an interesting motivation, and it kind of like, there's this idea of you can't just make things better. You have to achieve what everyone who did bad things to you and ruled over you, you want to have that over other people. So it's like, okay, you've taken this and went villainous with it, as opposed to a lot of the other characters, and that's a fine motivation. But like you said, it is shoved into like this one scene very, very late in the movie, and all of that stuff in that back third is rushed through so quickly. Like we because the killing of one emperor, to like the games, to this conversation with her, to like it all happens in this rapid fire machine gun like plotting that you just don't have time to kind of like sit. And there's so much going on where we barely even cut back to what's supposed to be the main character, so he feels like an afterthought.
Yeah, they specifically somewhere in here they have him meet up with his mother again. She gives him Maximus's / Aurelius's ring and says, hey, this belonged to Acacia as well. Get this to the general that's waiting outside the town that was supposed to arrive at the end of the week. He'll show up and he'll fight on your side, and we can take out Macrame, whatever his name is.
Maximus, that's Denzel Washington's character. And that's actually quite quickly after Pedro Pascal dies, and this is actually where I had my biggest like first problems kind of emerge, just in the sense that immediately Lucius is like, oh, I feel differently about everything.
Yeah. He like gives his mom a hug and all that. He's super cool with her now. And it's like, no, look, even if you like Rome, you still can have these issues with your mom abandoning you.
Yeah, and then he's immediately like, oh, I'll take the ring, and he's like, hey, there's like a minor character who's like a doctor who's been going around healing him, who's a free person, and he's like, hey, can you take this ring to this army of like 5,000 men and say, they'll know it's, Pedro Pascal's ring. And he goes, oh, who do I say it's coming from? And he's like, and for the first time he says, say it's coming from Lucius, blah, 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 and not whatever name he's been going with. And he's like, all right, fine. Okay. So it's like, okay, so he's taking this up. And again, we're in a very similar position to the first movie, where Maximus was like, oh, my men are coming. Like, I'm going to get free and my men are coming to help. And they play it a little bit differently here, where he actually like gets the keys off of this guy first, so that when the guards come in to like get the gladiators out of their cells for the next games, like it turns out they've already unlocked all the doors, so they sort of jump all the guards and like kill them. And like, so instead of him being sent out to like this, like basically a firing squad in gladiator combat where he's one man against many, all of his like gladiator like comrades all come running out and help him fight. So, but I think what's so weird about it is that scene is so quick, and then the actual finale takes place on the outskirts of the city. So the actual Colosseum part feels like, oh, we're just getting through this. Like, sure, there's big dramatic stuff going on. At this point, they've got Lucilla, tied up on a post because they're going to kill her, and they're going to make him watch. Like, they're fighting for her life, basically. That's what the intention is, anyway.
I mean, I know that you're not a huge fan of them, and at this point, neither am I, but it felt like if Avengers Endgame, if like the whole superhero fight was going on in that big field or whatever, but then Iron Man and Thanos went away to like Avengers Tower. Like, it just is completely separated from everything else that's happening, that you're kind of like, So what was the point of the big field battle then? Why were we spending so much time there?
Yeah, right. Well, that's the thing. There's not even a battle though, right? Like it's like they tease the battle, but the actual ending is he fights Denzel Washington and kills him, and then gives a rousing strength and honor speech to both armies, and they all get behind him.
Two things on that. First off, we get the final parallel where he keeps on having this dream of him being under the river Styx, and he sees the water up above. And during this final fight with Macrinus, he is actually underwater, and he hears, his wife or his mom or whoever say like strength and honor, and he gets that last bit of will to fight. But I love the fact that there's strength and honor. And I don't know about you, but the honorable part of the fight seems a bit weak to me when he literally just picks up a rock from a riverbed and bashes his head in with it. That seemed less than honorable on my side.
Does that, then cuts off his hand, and then stabs him.
And then guts him in the stomach, and then just turns around just being like, okay, everybody. And this is the other part for me with Lucius, is that everything after the point where he hands the ring off to the guy feels like we're going to make Lucius succeed at every single thing that Maximus failed at.
Yes,
like the whole.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. That's exactly what the end of the movie felt like to me. Is like we're going to everything that Maximus was supposed to do, Lucius is actually going to, including live. He's not going to die, which I think could have been compelling, admittedly, if it wasn't being so rushed. If it was actually taking time to make me care about him, one, believing that he cared about all this now and wanted to do it. Because at this point, I didn't believe that because they rushed through it too much. He pivoted so quick. And even then, though, there's still like a revenge element to it, though, because like during the games when he's like fighting around his mother tied up in the middle, it's actually Denzel Washington who grabs a bow and arrow and kills Lucilla, right in front of him. He's about to get her down off the post, and then the arrow just comes in swooping and hits her in the chest. And it's like, okay, that's that. So now there's like a personal revenge element for him.
Yeah.
And I don't think he needed to have that, because I think you could have done something really interesting here where you said that this character is much worse than all of the petty childish characters because he's so conniving and manipulative. It doesn't matter if he actually kills someone directly that the main characters care about. The idea is like how much like what he's trying to do as a whole is the problem.
They set up this entire movie. There was even a conversation where they sat and talked about the dream of Rome. And they say how Lucius this is after his switch over with his mom and everything going on there, where he specifically says like, oh yeah, the dream of Rome, that people can be free, whatever. And then Maximus gives his thing of like, no, the dream of Rome is power. That's why the biggest building we have is a Colosseum. Like it's all about fighting and strength and power. And that's the thing. I love that philosophical difference between them, and I want that to be enough that they fight at the end. I don't want it to have to dive into this thing of like, yes, you and I share incompatible worldviews. Only one of them can survive for the glory of Rome.
It should be a
battle. But also, you shot my mom.
Yeah, it should be a battle of ideology, and instead they have to make it the lowest common denominator that everyone will just get at face value.
Yeah.
And that's kind of boring. Especially because, they go through their way, the whole movie, to try and build his character. They have that whole thing where they're like making him like do the practice rowing on their own, where they've just got like this brick that they row against. Yeah. And they like force him to do it all day and all night, and the others want to help him, but the guard's like, no, he's earned this. Like he can keep doing this on his own. This is them practicing, of course, for the water fight, which we'll go back and talk about some of the standout action scenes. But like all of this is here to sort of build some character, but I think it's just a bit too thin ultimately, because instead of like having quiet moments with him where you get a sense of who he is as a person and what he believes in and whatever, it instead just is like, look at how great he is. He can do, because you joked a little bit in the review for the first one that Maximus was kind of great and was amazing at everything he did, but they kind of presented it in a very kind of like, no, this is just who he is. He's smart, he's capable, but he has strong values. And I'm okay with starting off with a conflicted character who has to like decide what his values is by the end. That's a good arc. But the way it's presented here, and in the way he pivots so quickly, and then it just becomes, I'm going to put on my father's armor. I'm going to go into that tomb and take off that chest piece, and I'm going to wear it for the final fight. And it's that thing where we couldn't just leave it open to interpretation that maybe he's literally Maximus's son. No, we have to actually say it 10 times. Not just once. We don't just have one moment. He says it repeatedly. I'm going to do this for my father. I'm going to do this for my father. And I'm like, we didn't need this to be said repeatedly. You could have had one little, like, that one little conversation about, oh, the rumors are that the father is Commodus. Like, that one conversation just sort of was like, oh, it makes you think, we know Maximus and Lucilia had a thing. Could be his.
Like, I don't mind if they directly confirm that he is the father. Even like, I don't like how they did it so directly so early on. It should be something that we play with a bit longer.
Yeah.
But I don't mind if it is directly confirmed by the end of the movie. I also don't mind if it's left up completely to, oh, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. My biggest problem comes in how frequently it is the driving force. Like, this is a man you saw in the field of gladiatordom like twice, and that's your entire exposure to him, regardless of whatever the legends say. Like, you don't have a connection with this person. There's no reason for you to say, like, this is for, if anything, say it's for Marcus Aurelius. Say it's for the guy who you actually did know for your entire childhood growing up and who had that same dream of Rome as Maximus.
But Maximus was inspirational, you see, whereas, you know, Marcus had a sordid past. He had a lot of things to redeem for his time as an emperor.
Sure, I guess, whatever. I don't know. I just got during that final fight scene between Macrinus and Lucius in the river, we get like a comically long time of showing Macrinus stabbing down into the water and hitting the breastplate that belonged to Maximus, and it's like blocking every shot. He's not getting stabbed because of it, and I'm like, was this common? Was this a thing that, like, in the previous movie, did I not have to worry about him getting any chest hits at all? Could he have just, like, tanked all that?
It's the power of Maximus protecting his son from beyond the grave. That's what it is.
Which is why I was kind of halfway expecting that Force Ghost to show up. Of just like, ooh, my son, build a better Rome, go to a wheat field.
Yeah, I could, like, honestly, the ending's baffling to me because he goes into the Colosseum when it's empty, just like the end of the first movie had that one scene at the end when it was empty, and he kneels down and he's like, Maximus, guide me, and we see the clouds move above his head. And it cut, you know, that track from the soundtrack starts playing with the singing, right? And it's a great track, but I'm like, okay, you're playing this beat here, and you see the hand from Maximus going through the field, and I thought, okay, all right, so it's going to cut back to him, and he's going to say like a final point of saying, I'm not ready to die, I'm going to, whatever, I don't know, like whatever the final point may have been, and instead it goes from Maximus's hand straight to credits. Which just further emphasizes this idea that Maximus' story was the important one. This movie didn't matter. What mattered was Gladiator 1, so that's what we're ending on.
I honestly thought for a second that, like, they had thought this through very deeply and were like, you can actually, it's like a cycle. Like, you can watch Gladiator 1 to Gladiator 2 or Gladiator 2 to Gladiator 1. And then when I thought about it for like a quarter second more, I'm like, no, actually, that doesn't work at all. That's completely, because, like, that would be the only reason I could think that you end with the basically opening shot of Gladiator 1. It's not actually, but, like, you know, the fields of wheat are pretty much the opening sequence of that movie.
Yeah, there's also a lot of the end as well, just not the final shot.
Right. So I was thinking maybe they were doing a thing where, like, you can go from Gladiator 2 into Gladiator 1, but then I realized nothing makes sense if you try to watch it in that order at all. No. So... yeah, no, I have no idea what they were even trying to get across there, because it would, for me, the fields of wheat was always supposed to be representative of joining your loved ones. It was supposed to be the idea of, you know, the afterlife, you're heading back, you're going to that final resting place. But this idea that he's not dying, he's looking for guidance on staying alive and like helping with this new Rome, I don't get what the wheat's supposed to be.
I hate the final scene. I hate everything about it. I hate him kneeling down and asking for guidance from Maximus. Like, I just don't understand what the goal of this scene is, other than just a shameless excuse to do the most iconic visual from the first movie. That's all it is. That
is also something that I was hoping they were going to be able to play with more on theming from the first one, is that the very first shot of this movie is Lucius, like, taking already harvested wheat and running it through his hands. And I'm like, okay, all right. So it's the same, but we're showing how it's different. It's further down the road. It's like Maximus was the previous. It was the wheat before the harvest. This is after the harvest. that is the most they ever do with like previous theming and pulling that stuff back. They never come back to that thing.
Yeah, yeah, and just to go back to, because we kind of just glossed over all the Colosseum scenes because they're fun for an action point of view, and even the opening war scenes kind of fun because there is some gore, there is some violence. There's decapitations. There's what if I actually when after the first Emperor's killed, Denzel Washington just shows up with his head and like sits it on a table. Like there is some fun stuff from there. I do love the absurdity of the place being filled with water and there literally being sharks around. I wish they did more with the sharks, but
see, that's the part that like my mind wasn't able to. I was like, okay, fine, you can fill the Colosseum up with water. I can believe that. I am willing to buy that Romans were good at architecture. They could do that. How the hell did they get the sharks in there? They had to cart those things through the city in order to get that happening. How the hell did that work?
In tanks of some kind.
In tanks, exactly.
Yes. I have no question or no answer for you. There's also a big fight with a rhino, in which our main man Lucius. But I thought he was going to throw dust in the rhino's eyes or dirt in the rhino's eyes. Instead, he kind of like makes like a smoke bomb out of it, where he kind of like clouds himself and then ducks out the way at the last second.
It felt like such a video game scene where it's like you got to stand in front of the wall, and then when the boss does the charging attack, you dodge out of the way at the last second. Yeah.
I do think that they're kind of fun. The violence is kind of good. I do think the last one's kind of over the top. I think Pedro Pascal's death moment is pretty good because of all the arrows coming in and a cool visual.
Yeah.
But I will say I don't think any of the Colosseum scenes have the impact of like the main first big one in Gladiator has. The first one in the actual Colosseum, not the little one in the Providence, but the
dirt.
The one that's like at the end where the Emperor realizes who he is and doesn't have the power to kill him because the crowd likes him too much. And like, he holds up his helmet in like sort of adoration for the crowd and like respect. Like, I don't think any scenes in the Colosseum in this movie come close to the feeling like that.
Yeah, there was the rhino fight scene. The guy who's on the rhino, whatever his name was, he jumps down, ends up doing a single fight with Lucius, and then Lucius actually loses, quote unquote. He falls to the ground. He's about to be killed. And the guy looks up and the crowd's chanting like, let him live, give him mercy. And the Emperor says like, yes, all right, we'll let the guy live. But then Lucius is like, screw you. I don't want your Roman pity. Kill me now and get it over with. Don't show me any mercy. And so the guy goes in for another swing. Lucius gets the upper hand, ends up getting the other guy down on the ground, to which the Emperor then gives the thumbs down and says, all right, cool, kill that guy. And that was the point where I was like, okay, he's going to spare him. That's where we're going to show more Maximus stuff. We're going to do whatever. But no, he is still enraged at Rome at that point. He fully decapitates him and it's just like, yeah, all right, I'm done. I'm out.
Yeah, I think emphasizing the differences in his character to Maximus would have only have made things better. Like, really set him apart, that he's a different type of character with a very different arc. This is someone who is angry and was angry at Rome even before his wife was was killed. Like, he has this like boiling inside of him. He's so anti-Rome. And then go from there. And then, I was kind of hoping that like at some point, like him and Pedro Pascal's character would finally understand each other in some way, and realizing that by making peace with the man that he's up till this point blamed for his wife's death is actually the one who's trying to change what Rome is and change everything he hates about it. And that would be where the resolution comes from at some point. That's not the way it went. And I wasn't even mad when Pedro Pascal died, because I thought, okay, the scene's pretty decent and there's potential things to come out of this. But looking back on it now, that really is where everything after that point is like, it's not perfect before that point by any means. There's definitely some wonkiness, but it was still enough to enjoy before that point and like get into it. After that point, though, is where everything with Denzel Washington scheming, everything with the politics side, the less emphasis and focus on Lucius as a character, where it feels like he's an afterthought. That entire back chunk of the movie is really where it all falls apart, and it's after his death.
Yeah, I think my biggest problem, and what I think that the story was trying to do, is that in the first half, you really should have been playing up the similarities between the philosophy of Denzel Washington's character and the philosophy of Lucius, of how they both hate Rome. They both like believe that it's just strength and power, like that's all it is. And obviously they have their difference in what their end goal is, but at the beginning their similarities are very the same. And to an extent it did that, but I don't feel like it really harped on it enough. By the time that the switch happens, I think Lucius really needed not to lose that hatred of Rome. I think he still needed to hold on to the hatred, but more so of what Rome has become, rather than, again, the dream of Rome, this idea that it could be better. I think it was all just in the way that he expressed it, because most of what he was saying were things like, you know, we can save Rome, we can build a better Rome, we can do whatever. I think what his speech really needed to be, we're going to tear this all down and build it back up. Like, we're going to start fresh. This is something that is corrupt from the inside out, and we need to rebuild Rome from the ground up, rather than it being, oh no, we just got to put the right people in power, because clearly that doesn't work.
There's also the problem of him not really feeling like he gains any, like in the first movie, it feels like Maximus obviously already had the loyalty of his army, who's not there, but he gains sort of loyalty and respect to the crowd, right? The crowd really are rooting for him, and it's not just because they like, oh, he's fun to watch in the Gladiator games. We get to the point where young Lucius is actually saying, no, he's the savior of Rome. There's people in the streets doing little plays about how Maximus is better than the Emperor, something that pissed Commodus off. In this movie, by the time we get to that final speech where he's standing in between two armies and makes his big grand gesture, it basically all just comes down to, oh, by the way, I'm related to Marcus Aurelius, so, you know, yeah. I'm the rightful heir. Strength and honor, dream of Rome, right? Right, guys? Right? And that's, like, I really feel like, especially for because it's not even like it's his army either, it's Pedro Pascal's army, right? Because he wasn't a Roman, he was actively at a different place.
It's two armies that are just standing there watching the fight happen. One are completely loyal to Denzel Washington, the other are completely loyal to Pedro Pascal, and he just stands up and he literally opens his speech with like, I don't know what you want me to say. Let's not fight anymore. There's been enough bloodshed. And everyone's like, all right, as an army, we can totally deal with no bloodshed.
I think what they really needed to do was really keep going with this idea of him just being defiant against the emperors, because the more they built that idea that the people of Rome hate these two emperors, right? The more you show him being willing to stand up against them, you could have sort of said, oh, the following is building through that. Yeah. And maybe some of the military were also feeling that way, even if they're sort of bound by duty to a certain point. But like,
there was the point in the first movie, the big moment that really like allowed the crowd to latch onto this guy is when he announces his name. He says, I am Maximus. I was the former general. And everyone's like, oh yeah, Maximus. We remember Maximus. Maximus was cool. What the hell is he doing as a gladiator? This one, I feel like the big moment should have been during the boat fight. And I do want to talk a bit more about that boat fight. But during the boat fight, Lucius gets his hands on a crossbow and fires it, trying to aim at Pedro Pascal.
Yeah.
But it lands on like the headpiece right between the two emperors, which spooks the hell out of them and gets them out of dodge. But I feel like that was also simultaneously the moment where the crowd should have seen that and been like, hey, that guy almost killed those crappy emperors. He's super awesome. Let's get those same legends built up about him and like how he's going to make things better or something. Like ignoring the blood, right? Ignoring his actual identity. Just the fact that he's going at it and like trying to make that happen.
Yeah. If anything, I kind of wish that everyone else never found out who he was, like really, because I don't want it to be about the fact that he is related to characters. You know, it's like more, he rises up and he's doing this because it's the right thing to do, because he's been inspired by who Maximus once was, not because he feels like he is bound to it by blood.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. Maximus was supposed to be a very inspiring figure. To make it that you're only doing this because, oh yeah, he was actually my secret baby daddy. Like, you kind of missed the point of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to bring up with the boat fight, though, I think we mentioned all the other fights. The only other one that happened was the baboon fight. That wasn't in the Colosseum. That was like the training.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we mentioned, you know, his friend got bit by a baboon there, and he
Right.
kind of like held his own and like killed the baboon, which led to like everyone kind of like around him joked and sort of made monkey noises at him for a while, because he's the guy that because he bites the baboon to win at one point. Everyone jokes that he eats monkeys, and he gets a lot of jokes.
That scene and one later scene, and never again.
Yeah.
Those two scenes between the boat scene and the baboon scene, I felt were the worst of the CGI. I think that those were the ones where they played it just a bit too heavily. And the boat scene, I'm actually considering a bit worse, despite the fact the CGI was a little bit more reserved. Like, you don't see that much of the sharks in the water. I think it's worse just because I lost all sense of geography between the two boats that were fighting. I had no idea which boat was taking hits, who was on which boat, what anything was going on. I just had to rely on what the narrative was telling me.
Yeah, honestly,
throughout.
like my thing with that is I think in hindsight I wouldn't have had two big ships like that, even though there was I mean, it makes for a great visual when you first see these two big warships inside the Colosseum, don't get me wrong. And there is that fun bit where the Gladiator ship, they all pull their oars in, and because they just have the spikes sticking out, it actually destroys the oars of the other ship and gives them an advantage. That's a fun little bit. But I agree with you, the sense of geography's all gone. But I thought, okay, they've set up all these like mini fake islands in the water.
Right.
I was thinking that the gladiators were going to be planted on these islands, and maybe they'd have like a couple of small like sailboats, like just really small ones with oars, that they would have to like, so it'd be very dangerous to, so I thought there was going to be a lot more suspense, and it was going to be like a long sequence of like, there's sharks in the water, we have to, you know, get over to that little island or something, and like I don't know, but the fact that it just ended up being like, oh, two big boats, and they just sort of like jump from that one boat to the other boat, and some people fall in the water, but it wasn't using the setting as much as I was hoping it was going to.
Right. No,
So-
I agree. That's 100% my big thing too, because they do, like you said, there's all these panning shots where we see from really high up, and I noticed the islands that they had built in the middle here, they don't come into play at all. At no point is one of them like, dodge around the island. Like, no, they're off to the far side of the Coliseum. Nobody gives a damn about them.
Yeah, I mean, you could do like a half-hour sequence here. It's basically just like that. What's that movie called? The Shallows, where it's just like they're in these little islands and the sharks are going around and they're trying to find a way to like bait the shark over to their enemies. Like, go after him, go after him.
I mean, I'd be fine with that. I'm curious how this game would have ended if like both the ships just ended up sinking and everyone died. That seems like it's not a good way for the games to go.
Yeah. Also, I'm skeptical of how well this Colosseum holds that water. I feel like it would be draining constantly.
Oh yeah, clearly the outside of the Coliseum is absolutely garbage. That's why they showed the water is still continuously pouring in.
Yeah.
It's constantly flooding the streets outside, but hey, it's a cool game.
Yes. But that said, though, it was so silly that I'm like, you know what? I'm down for some silly at this point. I want more ludicrous stuff.
Yeah. I mean, what was from the first movie, the biggest thing they really did was, unless I'm misremembering, it's the tigers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that felt so minimal compared to the fact of you get this dude on a rhino, you get the Coliseum filled up with water, like all of those feel much bigger and stronger things. But then they pivot over to, okay, now Pedro Pascal needs to be killed at the next day's games, and it's just him versus four guards and then him versus Lucius. So no big spectacle there. And then the next day is a parade float where Lucilla is tied to the like mast of it, and again, no big spectacle. So they kind of peaked with the boat battle and never quite got up to that big of spectacle again.
Yeah, and honestly, it's one of the contributing factors as to why that final fight in the Colosseum does feel very rushed, and it's not the finale. The finale takes place elsewhere, which I'm not saying you have to have the finale in the Colosseum. It just felt a little bit strange to me.
I mean, I don't know what I would want it to be. No, I mean, honestly, it would just require an entire rewrite of like that last little sequence, because I get the point of, okay, you have two opposing armies coming up against each other, and like you need to be able to speak to the armies and say, hey, dream a better Rome. But honestly, I can't see any way to keep that, or even around the Colosseum or anything like that. It just feels it had to be completely separate with the story they were telling.
I mean, the first movie found a way to make the final conflict happen in the Colosseum, and it felt like all the dramatic threads ended there. But this movie wanted to go back to this idea of armies coming into the city, and it wanted to pay off on it this time, which is fine, but it does also mean that has to be elsewhere. It can't be in the Colosseum.
I mean, let me throw this out to you. Do you think, from an audience perspective, it's kind of a little bit of an annoying bait and switch of, we have two large armies that are going to be fighting outside the city. They literally get within 50 feet of each other, but, oh, hey, no fights happening today because we killed the Emperor.
I don't know, I'm conflicted, because on the one hand, I like the idea of... Because I was thinking this as I was watching it, like, I like the idea of the main character in a Gladiator sequel of some sort, making the choice to not go through with the revenge at the end, which is what I thought this, when Pedro Pascal I thought was like the main antagonist. I thought, oh, this might be like a really ballsy ending where he chooses not to take the revenge, and they say something a bit more nuanced with the ending. But because of how they present it, and because it was something, you know, in the first movie they teased, oh, like, Maximus's army's coming to the city and it's going to overthrow, and then that doesn't happen, and then we get the final one-on-one fight instead in the Colosseum. It works in that movie, but you could argue that they wanted to pay off what they considered a cock tease in the first movie by actually having the army show up and like have the good guy win. Right. But you're kind of right in that once you have two armies opposing each other, there's kind of an expectation of a big battle, and I guess it's a kind of thing where if the fight between him and Denzel Washington was good enough that it felt like the climax, you wouldn't necessarily be expecting another big battle after it. But did it feel that good? Did it feel like it was enough of a dramatic endpoint? And I think they tried to shortcut it by having him kill his mother in the previous scene. But I
agree. I think there was just so much lacking here. Obviously, it worked for the story they wanted to tell of this. Oh, yeah, we're going to redeem Rome. We're going to get it back to a good point. By the way, in history, no, didn't stick. But regardless.
Well, that's why the Roman Empire is still around, because eventually it worked.
Yeah, 100%. We just call the Roman Empire Amazon now. But no, I don't know. I think what it really comes down to for me is that by the time we hit this final scene, I still didn't feel that justification for this movie to exist. Like, even if they had a really cool fight scene, even if they had like the armies fight or anything like that, up until this third act finale, I still didn't feel like there was anything that justified this movie saying something either expanding on the first one or its own point that it's trying to make. It just felt like it was doing the first one over again, but worse. So I wasn't going to get anything out of it regardless of how it ended.
It absolutely gets to that point where it just feels like that, and there's definitely moments throughout where it felt like that. The one hope I had is that in that first half, when they set up Pedro Pascal as a sympathetic character, I thought the point of this movie, the thing it was going to say, is that the first movie was about, revenge or whatever you even want to call it that. This movie's about forgiveness. And it's about him forgiving his mom, forgiving this man who kind of was involved in the death of his wife, even though it was just kind of like by the happenstance of being on the opposing army. It wasn't like a personal thing. It wasn't like being vindictive by going after her. It was a strategic decision in a battle, and that was all it was. And that could be a very different ending for the movie to go. Instead, it's just, we want to have a final fight. We're going to try and make it have as much drama as possible by having the mother killed first, but it just feels like a shortcut. And then the big speech falls flat. And, when that main theme kind of comes in as he's making the speech, I thought, I should be feeling rousing stuff here. I should be feeling the emotions. And, and when I watched the first Gladiator again, I do. Like, those final beats where, she stands up and says, there was a dream that was Rome once, Maximus died for that, honor him, blah, all that stuff at the end of Gladiator. And the music's playing in the background. It does hit. It hits, and you feel like, yeah, he died for something. Like, honor him, damn it.
Yeah.
Here, I love the idea of having the main character convince everyone not to use violence. I think that's a really good positive message to have in a movie. I just don't think the movie justifies them being willing to accept it, or that the speech is good enough, or that he's earned enough cred from them, or us, the audience even, to actually make that argument.
Yeah, for me, I felt like the audience fell flat, or the argument fell flat, just because, look who he's talking to. This is literally the violence brigade. This is literally the people whose entire purpose is, hey, let's kill as many people as humanly possible. And you're telling me that this random ass dude who says that he's the grandson of, historically, if they're going by that, 6 emperors ago, that they're just like, yeah, sure, we'll listen to this guy. Why not? Like, it doesn't strike me as something that actually works. It felt more like a Disney moment of like, you're right. Oh, let's all do something peaceful now instead.
It's basically the end of Miami Connection. It's he just he stands up after killing a bunch of people in the Coliseum and says, only through the eradication of violence can we achieve world peace. And the army's like, you know what? He's got a point, damn it.
I hate it, but you're right.
You can learn more about Miami Connection over on our Patreon show, Extra Reels.
Yes. I honestly, I don't know how much more I really have to say. I think that this, as much as we said all the previous stuff, I think that this one, it's just something where I kept on finding myself, and again, the pivot point is the Pedro Pascal death. Like,
yes,
there was a way to make that turn work. There was a way to really focus in on the story. And I think for me, what I kind of wanted it to be was, again, Commodus is in the first movie is a villain. He is someone who does bad things, but there is the fact that he is not representative of the larger problem. Like, Commodus is a symptom. He's not the threat. Like, the fact that once he's gone, that's what allows the Senate to be able to fix the actual problems with Rome, theoretically. In this one, Macromus feels like the problem. He feels like he is absolutely 100%. This is the threat to Rome. And if we allow him to seize power, everything will go to hell. But then when he's killed, it just feels like, oh, and now everything's magically fixed, rather than there's going to be some hard work after this.
Yeah, I think instead of like the harsh turn, like, I wish Pedro Pascal had said something right before he died, or as he was dying from all the arrows to the chest and back.
It might have been hard with the 2 punctured lungs, but he could figure it out.
If he'd said something like, because up until this point, our main character's been anti-Rome, and we know Pedro Pascal was plotting to try and take these emperors down, but Lewis just doesn't know that, right? Or I don't think he knew that by that point anyway. If he said something like, you know, with his dying breath, I accept death, but take them down. Like, stop the emperors, like, take back Rome. Like, say something that would surprise Lucius, because Lucius thinks this guy is all pro-Rome because he's the guy that led the army and killed his wife. Have him say something that genuinely makes him go, wait, what the hell did he just say? And then have that be kind of the thread that can be then pulled on by his mother or whoever else who needs to, like, talk to him and convince him. Have that be him starting to question what Pedro Pascal's motivations were. Instead, the very next time we see him, he's like, yeah, I was wrong about him. Yeah, you are my mom. Yeah, I'm upset about all this. This fix Rome, baby.
I like the idea of it being that he comes to the realization that, like, it's not the people. The people of Rome itself are all suffering under this larger structure of what Rome is. And he can get that, like, oh, Pedro Pascal, he died or whatever, but, like, Rome still moves on. Like, Rome is still going to keep on expanding and killing God knows how many other countries. That's the stuff that needs to be stopped. And it's not even like that stopping the emperors would do that. It needs to be a ground up change of how Romans think. Have him go in with that mindset, and it would still allow him to have this hatred of Rome as a concept while being a savior to it at the same time. But yeah, you know, all he ends up being is just like, oh yeah, no, I was wrong. Let's take out the emperors. And honestly, the end game here, it doesn't even say he wants to put the Senate to power. He literally just doesn't want the emperors in power anymore. That's all he really goes for.
Yeah. I think it's clear that regardless of any suggestions we've made, this movie doesn't nail it. And we're, you know, maybe we are not quite hitting the exact same points we want to see fixed, but I think ultimately we can only do so much. It's the people making the movie's job to, like, find that line to walk, to make it work, where the motivations make sense, the messaging makes sense, and ultimately it doesn't. We're trying to find ways of fixing it, but ultimately we can't just magically tie it in a bow.
I feel like what we're trying to do is fix things without changing the first half because we like what the first half was doing, but ultimately you got to change stuff in the first half.
No, I think that's fair. I think it's a very flawed movie. Yeah. All right. Okay, David, what are you picking as your scene of the movie?
Oh boy, I wish I was thinking about this more as I was watching it. I think my scene of the movie. I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to be just absolutely giving into everything we were saying, but I think it's got to be the Pedro Pascal death. I think that none of the Colosseum scenes like really worked for me up before then, and everything else was just like exposition and backstory, and then everything after that just kind of let me down in a lot of ways too. So I'm gonna say that it's the Pedro Pascal death. I think that's the last point where I felt there was really some hope, and it was leaving me on a very, very good mark. But after that, it was very much downhill.
Yeah, I could pick that easily. I think maybe just to be different, the one that I'm kind of debating alongside, I'll pick, which is the kind of the private gladiator fight at the party, where the main character kind of defies the emperor and refuses to, I just think it's a very interesting and very different from anything that was in the first movie. So. And it was kind of emphasizing how he's different from Maximus, which I wish the movie just kept doing more. Instead of being like, no, I am my father. He is my father. Did I tell you he's my father? I am Maximus' son. I am heir to the Maximus.
But why didn't they ever explore who his father was? That wasn't one thing I wanted to bring up just very quickly. That private gladiator fight scene, I thought more was going to come out of the fact that he refused to speak to the emperor, and Denzel tried to step in for damage control, and he's like, oh, he's from Africa, he only speaks his native language. And then immediately he comes out and starts doing the poem. And it's like, oh, he only speaks his native language, huh? Seems to me like he knows Roman pretty damn well.
Yeah, I think they're just so amused that he knows poetry, because that's kind of weird for someone who's in his position.
Yeah.
That they're just caught off guard with that and think it's amusing. MVP of the movie.
I want to say it's a fight. I want to say that there is the chance for Pedro Pascal. He's very likable in this, but not quite enough going on with him until he's killed. I want to say even Lucius, because main character, obviously, he should have a good plot, but most entertaining and the most plot driving throughout the movie is absolutely Denzel Washington as Macrinus. So I got to give it to him. I think it was sealed. It was sealed at the moment where he was in the Senate and he pulled out the previous emperor's head and just set it on the pedestal. That was the moment I was like, yeah, this guy's our character.
There's also little mannerisms he does where he'll stick out his tongue, or he knows how to be friendly with the others and like grease the palms, as it were.
It does. He's got this menace to him without ever actually being openly evil. He's just this under the level, clearly conniving, but never outwardly someone that other people would be like, oh yeah, why should I trust you?
Yeah. So I kind of agree with all that, although I will just throw in the caveat that a lot of the movie's problems and rush plot points also directly involve his character.
Yes.
So I do think that's worth mentioning, because a lot of his stuff getting into play in that back half are all revolving around him. That said, though, it's still probably him, because he gives the most memorable performance. He's just, I don't know. I think it is between him and Pascal, though. I think Connie Nielsen was good in the first movie. I think here, if she feels like she's phoning it in a little bit. It kind of like there's moments, especially when they were doing like the new flashback to like right after the end of the first movie, and she's holding like this other actor's face and saying, "I need to send you away, my son. I will find you, but because you're now the heir to the throne, people want to kill you. You must leave." Even though one of the final things that Maximus said in Gladiator was
that he's safe.
Lucius is safe.
They replay that line and then immediately cut to, you're not safe. Get out of here.
Yeah, Lucilia does not agree with that, apparently, Maximus. Was she right? Was she right? I have no idea. But
I feel like from his perspective, the non-politician, he's like, look, I've dealt with the immediate threat. Clearly that means everything is fine. And she like lets him believe that until he dies, and then turns around and is just like, okay, but he's an idiot. He doesn't understand like the power vacuum he's just made. Please get out of town.
But yeah. All right, Denzel. So, what are you rating Gladiator 2?
So as I was walking out of the theater, I was following behind this couple who, shout out to them, did not shut up for the whole goddamn movie. So thanks for that.
There was a
but I
prick
was
in front of
walking-
me actually in the theater who was just googling stuff on his phone constantly. I'm like, mother.
He never saw the first one. He was very confused. Who's Maximus? But no, I was walking out behind them from the theater, and they actually said, like, as we were walking out, like, oh, what would you give it out of 10? And I'm like, la, 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 I'm not listening. I don't want to be biased, but I did end up hearing them. And ultimately, I do have to agree. I think this one comes in at a 6.5. I think it is just shy of that actually good mark.
They actually went with 6.5. They did a half point.
Yep, they went with a half point.
They must listen to the show.
Yeah. Hi. Stop talking. But yeah, no, 6.5. I think it's just shy of that good mark. There is a lot to like about this movie. I think that, like, just inherently it is a decently well-made movie, but ultimately it kind of falls apart in the second half, and it nowhere stands up to the first one. So it's a problem of just not justifying its own existence as a nostalgia sequel. And boy, howdy, is it a nostalgia sequel.
I think you're being a bit generous, if I'm honest, David.
All right, that's fine.
I like I said, I was kind of into the first half, not without faults, but was like, that seems like a fine sequel. And then it started to lose me, and I was feeling downer and downer. But even up until a certain point when things were feeling rushed, at least some of the stuff like Denzel Washington carrying around this guy's head and all that kind of thing, the remaining emperor brother like appointing a monkey as his second in command, and everyone just being like, I guess we'll clap for that.
I love Dondas being the council. Love it.
So like, I was like, you know what, this is probably still a 6 out of 10. It's watchable, it's decent enough, it's just not very great or good even. And then the ending happened, the last 10 minutes, but especially that final scene, and ending on Maximus as if he's more important than anything in this movie. I can't go higher than 5 out of 10.
Damn, all right.
It's mediocre. It starts off just pretty good even, and it just dwindled throughout the movie. And I would have been fine with the 60. I'd have come in, I'd have made all my complaints, but I'm like, you know what, it's still very watchable. I think it just slips down that last chunk at the end just to get to that point where I'm like, you know what, mediocre. I don't think I'll ever feel like watching this again.
Oh yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't think I'm gonna watch this again, but that's also just because I have no interest in it whatsoever. Like, I took me how long to watch Gladiator 1? Gladiator 2 is definitely not up on the block for many, many years.
Yeah, so long story short, it does not make the cut.
Fair enough. Question is, how far down?
It just does not make the cut. I don't think
Just doesn't make the cut?
It's not
All
in the
right.
painful,
Yeah.
territory.
I'd say cut from the collection is fine. That's a roundabout where I would say. I mean, I'm trying to think if there's any audience that would argue against that from what we've said, but no. Gladiator 1 can still fully stand alone. There is nothing from this movie that, like, adds anything to the mythology.
No. And it did
It's just
stand
its own
alone.
thing.
It stood alone for 24 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was no need for anything else.
Yeah. If you really want to know, though, all of Maximus's stuff was buried with him. There you go.
As far as we're concerned, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, it was interesting, since we're on top of the movie now, is when I was getting clips for the first movie review, I was looking at the extended cut, just because that was the one that was readily available to get clips from, and I didn't watch it or anything or whatever, but when I was going through, I did sort of land in some scenes that I was like, oh, that wasn't in the theatrical cut I just watched. The main thing I noticed was that, remember in Gladiator, he found Commodus finds out he's been lied to about Maximus being alive. Like, oh, they lied to me. How can I trust? They don't respect me because they don't talk to me. You actually get like a full subplot of him going to like his like commander and saying, "Hey, these guys that work for you lied to me," and the commander tries to like, "Oh, they're loyal soldiers," but then there's also an execution scene where they get like basically all killed. So it sort of fleshed out that at the very least. I thought you'd be curious as what one of the extra things was. But
Absolutely.
not needed. The pacing in the first movie is pretty perfect, to be honest, so I can see why he took it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, there you go.
It's just showing more of his descent into tyranny.
Pretty much. But I think you get that in the performance regardless. So, yeah, disappointing. Not that I had high hopes, but there was always the chance this was going to surprise me and be a very worthwhile sequel, and I don't think it hit that. I think it came in and is very middle of the road, mediocre, falling victim to all the nostalgia shit that I'm so sick of seeing in all these legacy sequels. It can't stand on its own feet at all.
I will say, to whether it's Ridley Scott or some producer or the screenwriter, whoever, thank you for not trying to figure out a way to get Russell Crowe to show back up. Thank you.
They might have tried.
They may have tried, but whoever shot that down, thank you.
Or maybe they thought, no, his face is too round compared to what it was back in... Because he's meant to have been dead. It's not like he's meant to have aged.
They did the AI de-age for Lucilla.
True.
They could do it the same for him.
Yeah, no, we're just going to have clips of the first movie showing up occasionally to remind us of Maximus. That's all.
Yeah. We only need to know the things that he said, like what we do through our lives echo throughout eternity. Strength and honor.
Strength and honor.
Strength and honor.
Yeah.
They say that like that's like the rallying cry right before the third act. Like all the gladiators get all pumped with strength and honor. I'm like, that means nothing to you. Why are you so pumped by that?
Dear. All right. There you go. That's Gladiator 2.
Yep.
Never watching that again. So thank you very much for joining us, everyone. You can support the show and all the stuff we make here in Mail Fuzz Movies, whether that be this show, Streams After Midnight, or our sci-fi movie podcast, The Atomic Cinema Experiment, which is also me and David. Go check that out if you haven't. But you can support all of it over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses. Me and David do 2 monthly bonus shows on Patreon, amongst other things that you can get over there. Those include the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection. And at the $5 and up tier, you get access to extra reels, where we review some of the worst things ever made. Sometimes they're so bad they're amazing, sometimes they're just torture. But that's where Miami Connection, we reviewed that, I referenced a little bit earlier.
Which is absolutely related to Gladiator. Practically a 1-for-1 remake.
They have strength, they have honor, they have topless men.
Everything that this movie needed.
Anyway, that is the show. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. What did you think of Gladiator 2? Let us know in the comments below. Or you can get me on Blue Sky now.
You got a Blue Sky. I guess I should hop on that.
Yeah, I don't know what the handle is. The title is Peter from Mild Fuzz is the name. It's something at B Sky Social or something. I don't know. It's all right,
we'll figure it out. But hey, that is the end of a technical season. What's coming up next time?
Yeah, that's true. This is the end of a season. Yeah. What is coming up next time? So yes, the next season we're getting into a Christmas period here. So next week there'll be no episode. We always have a week off between the seasons. And then begins Die Hard season. So we are going into Nakatomi Plaza. It's not Christmas season until Hans Gruber has crashed the party at Nakatomi Plaza.
Fair enough.
That's the rule. It's the rule in this house, damn it. So we'll see you next time for Die Hard. And we're doing the whole franchise, of course. All 5 of them.
Well, Pete, before people see what the first one is, I'll say I'm super excited about 5. You've made it sound so alluring.
I'm not looking forward to watching 5 again. I'm just not. Anyway, that is the show, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic strength and diplomatic honor.